At dawn on a September morning in 490 BC, the plains of Marathon were silent but for the rustle of the sea breeze. To the east, the Persian fleet, hundreds of ships, lay anchored in the bay, their sails lowered after disgorging one of the most formidable armies the world had ever seen. To the west, a far smaller force of just 10,000 Greek hoplites stood shoulder to shoulder, their bronze shields gleaming in the light of the rising sun. They were outnumbered, outflanked, and facing what seemed like certain annihilation. Yet within hours, the impossible would happen. Against all odds, the Greeks would rout the vast Persian army, slaying thousands and sending the survivors scrambling back to their ships. It was a victory that stunned the ancient world, and one that many historians argue changed the course of Western civilization forever. This is the story of the Battle of Marathon, how a tiny city-state dared to defy an empire, how brilliant strategy overturned sheer numbers, and how a single clash of arms secured the survival of democracy in its infancy. To understand the drama of Marathon, we need to step back into the geopolitical storm of the 5th century BC. At that time, the Persian Empire stretched like a colossus across the known world. Ruled by King Darius I, it encompassed modern-day Iran, Iraq, Egypt, Anatolia, and much of Central Asia. No power seemed able to resist its armies, which were disciplined, vast, and supported by immense wealth. But on the western fringes of the empire lay a patchwork of fiercely independent Greek city-states: Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, each jealous of its autonomy. When the Ionian Greeks in Asia Minor, subjects of Persia, revolted in 499 BC, Athens and Eretria dared to support them. Though the revolt was crushed, Darius took note of Athens. To him, this small city had committed a grave insult. Herodotus, the father of history, tells us that Darius commanded a servant to whisper to him each day at dinner, "Master, remember the Athenians." By 490 BC, the Persian king was ready to act. He launched a massive punitive expedition across the Aegean. The message was clear: Athens would be punished for its insolence. When the Persians landed on the shores of Marathon, some 40 kilometers northeast of Athens, they brought an army estimated at between 20,000 and 25,000 men, though some ancient accounts inflate the number far higher. Whatever the precise figure, it dwarfed the Athenian force. The Persian army was a mosaic of peoples: Persians, Medes, Scythians, Egyptians, and others, each with their own style of fighting. The Persians favored light infantry armed with bows, javelins, and wicker shields. Their greatest asset, however, was their cavalry, fast-moving, deadly horsemen who could break enemy lines and harass retreating soldiers. Against such an army, a smaller force might hope only to delay defeat, not to secure victory. In contrast, the Athenians relied on their citizen soldiers, hoplites. These were free men, not professionals, who armed themselves at their own expense. They wore heavy bronze helmets, breastplates, and greaves. Each carried a round shield, the aspis, and a spear up to 8 feet long. Their strength was not in individual prowess, but in formation. The phalanx, a wall of shields and spears, was nearly impenetrable if it held firm. But the phalanx was slow and rigid, vulnerable to flanking or cavalry, and it required enormous discipline. Only about 10,000 Greeks marched to Marathon, 9,000 Athenians, and 1,000 allies from the small city of Plataea. Sparta, famed for its warriors, had promised support but delayed, citing a religious festival. The Athenians would have to face Persia largely alone. For several days, the two armies faced each other across the plain of Marathon. Neither side moved. The Athenians hesitated to abandon the safety of their high ground, while the Persians waited for the right moment to crush them. Within the Athenian camp, debate raged. Some generals argued for caution, even surrender. Others pushed for battle. Among them was Miltiades, a man with experience in Persian ways of war. He argued that waiting would only favor the Persians. Athens could not withstand a siege if the enemy marched on the city. Miltiades proposed something daring: to attack first. Miltiades understood that the Persian strength lay in their center and cavalry. He crafted a bold plan. The Athenian line would thin its center and reinforce its flanks. It was a dangerous move, weakening the heart of the army, but it allowed the Greeks to stretch their line to match the Persians' width. When the battle began, the Greeks would charge, not walk, but run the nearly mile-wide distance between the armies. The run was meant to minimize the time exposed to Persian arrows. Once engaged, the strong Greek wings would attempt to encircle the Persian center in a crushing maneuver. It was a gamble. If the center collapsed too quickly, the wings would be surrounded. But if it worked, it could shatter the Persian army. At Miltiades' signal, the Greek hoplites began their charge. Herodotus writes that the Persians were astonished. Never before had they seen enemies run into a hail of arrows. The Greek shields rattled, arrows clattered off bronze, men fell. But the phalanx kept coming. They smashed into the Persian lines with the full weight of bronze and muscle. The thin Greek center bent under the pressure, and for a moment it seemed the Persians would break through. But on the wings, the Greeks surged forward. The Plataeans on the left, the Athenians on the right, pushed back the lighter Persian troops. Then, executing Miltiades' plan, the wings wheeled inward, encircling the Persian center. Chaos erupted. Trapped, the Persian soldiers broke ranks. Some fled toward their ships. Others drowned in the nearby marshes, cut down as they tried to escape. The Greeks pursued relentlessly. By the day's end, some 6,400 Persians lay dead, compared to only 192 Athenians. It was a staggering victory, and one almost no one had believed possible. Even as the Greeks exulted in their triumph, danger loomed. The Persian fleet, though bloodied, still sailed toward Athens, hoping to take the city undefended. Here enters the legend of Pheidippides. According to later tradition, the messenger sprinted from Marathon to Athens, nearly 26 miles, to announce the victory. Uttering the words, "We have won," he collapsed and died from exhaustion. Whether the story is myth or history, it captures the desperate urgency of that moment. The Athenians marched swiftly back to their city, arriving just as the Persian fleet appeared offshore. Seeing the defenders ready, the Persians turned back. Athens was saved. The Battle of Marathon was more than a military victory. It was a psychological earthquake. The Persians, thought invincible, had been defeated by a tiny force of free citizens. The message was clear. Empire could be challenged and freedom defended. For the Athenians, the victory became foundational to their identity. The dead were buried in a great mound on the battlefield, the Sharos of Marathon, where their memory was honored for generations. The battle also cemented Athens' growing confidence. Within decades, it would build a navy, defeat Persia again, and establish an empire of its own. Perhaps most importantly, historians argue that had Athens fallen, its experiment in democracy might have ended in infancy. Without Marathon, there may have been no Periclean Golden Age, no Socrates, no Plato, no Aristotle, and the entire trajectory of Western civilization might have been different. Marathon quickly entered the realm of legend. Poets sang of it, playwrights invoked it, and orators reminded citizens of their ancestors' courage. Centuries later, in 1896, when the modern Olympic Games were revived in Athens, organizers sought a race that would echo the ancient spirit. Thus was born the Marathon, a 26-mile endurance run named for the battlefield where 10,000 Greeks defied an empire. The Battle of Marathon endures not merely because it was a military upset, but because it embodies timeless themes: courage against overwhelming odds, the power of unity, the brilliance of strategy over brute force. In the quiet dawn before the clash, every Greek soldier must have felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. They were not professional warriors. They were farmers, craftsmen, citizens. Yet together, on that plain, they carved their place into legend. When we speak of Marathon today, we are not only recalling the battle, but celebrating the moment when a free people stood firm. When 10,000 men proved that determination and daring could overcome an empire. And that is why 2,500 years later, the word marathon still means endurance, struggle, and ultimately victory.